Listen, I don't care if you think inflation is just a small number that economists argue about. I care about one thing: whether you'll be able to afford your coffee and your medications when you're 70 years old. And right now, if you're over 50 and you're falling into any of these 5 inflation traps, you're going to wake up at 75 and discover that the money you worked so hard to save can't even cover your basic living expenses. I'm Grace Park, and I've watched countless people get absolutely devastated by inflation without even realizing it was happening. These were smart people, hardworking people, people who saved diligently. They thought they had enough money for retirement. They looked at their account balance and felt secure, but they didn't understand that inflation was silently eating away at their purchasing power year after year after year. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. Let me paint you a picture of what I see all the time. Someone retires at 65 with $1 million. Sounds pretty good, right? They feel financially secure. They've done the math. They figure they can live on $40,000 or $50,000 a year, and their money will last. But here's what they didn't account for. Over the past 10 years, inflation has already reduced the purchasing power of that $1 million by 20 to 30%. What cost $1 10 years ago now costs $1.30 or $1.40. Their $1 million in purchasing power is really only $700,000 in today's dollars. And over the next 20 years of retirement, if inflation averages even 5%, that purchasing power will be cut in half again. Suddenly, their comfortable retirement turns into a desperate scramble. They're forced to cut back on everything. They can't afford the medications they need. They have to sell their house and downsize. They become dependent on their children. This is the reality of inflation, and most people don't see it coming until it's too late. Today, I'm going to expose 5 major inflation traps that are silently destroying retirement savings for people over 50. These traps are insidious because they feel safe, they feel conservative, they feel like exactly what a responsible person approaching retirement should be doing, but they're actually guaranteeing that inflation will erode your wealth, and Wall Street, the banks, and even your financial advisor don't want you to understand this truth because they profit from your ignorance. If you're over 50 and you don't want to spend your 70s and 80s broke and dependent, smash that subscribe button right now. This channel exists to expose the invisible killers of wealth that nobody else wants to talk about. Let me establish something important. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've seen multiple cycles of high inflation and low inflation. I've watched people build wealth, and I've watched people lose everything. And here's what I know for certain. The people who get destroyed by inflation are rarely the ones who took crazy risks. They're the ones who thought they were being safe and conservative. They listened to conventional wisdom. They did what their banker told them. They followed their financial advisor's recommendations, and they got quietly destroyed. I've personally witnessed too many people hit 60 with what looked like a solid nest egg, only to discover at 75 that their money couldn't maintain even a basic standard of living. $100,000 that felt substantial at 60 buys maybe $60,000 or $70,000 worth of goods and services at 75. And the tragedy is these people have no way to recover. They can't go back to work. They can't rebuild their savings. They're stuck watching their purchasing power evaporate while prices keep rising. What I'm about to tell you is going to upset a lot of banks and insurance companies, because these institutions make enormous profits by selling you products that feel safe, but actually expose you to massive inflation risk. They want you focused on principal preservation and guaranteed returns. They don't want you thinking about purchasing power or real returns after inflation, because if you understood the real math, you'd never buy what they're selling. Here's the fundamental truth about inflation that most people over 50 don't grasp. When you're young, inflation is annoying but manageable. If prices go up, you work more, you get raises, you adjust. You have time on your side. But when you're 55 or 60, inflation becomes your mortal enemy. You're approaching the end of your earning years. You no longer have decades to recover from losses. And worse, you're about to enter the phase of life where your expenses are most vulnerable to inflation: healthcare, housing, food, utilities. These aren't luxuries you can cut. They're necessities, and they're inflating faster than almost anything else. In the past, when inflation was 2 or 3%, you could afford to be a little sloppy with your planning. You could keep money in bonds or CDs paying 4%, and you'd be roughly okay. But we're not in that world anymore. We've seen inflation spike to 7, 8, 9%. Even as it's moderated, it's staying well above historical averages. Meanwhile, healthcare costs are rising 6 to 8% annually. Housing costs in many areas are up 10% or more. Food prices have exploded, and if you're 55 or 60 right now, you're going to be dealing with these elevated prices for the next 25 or 30 years of your life. And here's what the banks and insurance companies won't tell you. They're selling you products that lock in low returns. Certificates of deposit paying 3 or 4%. Fixed annuities guaranteeing 5%. Government bonds yielding 4%. They market these as safe and conservative. But when inflation is running at 5, 6, 7%, you're losing purchasing power every single year. You're getting poorer in real terms, even as your account balance stays the same or grows slightly. Let me give you some historical perspective that should terrify you. In the 1970s, inflation averaged over 7% annually. People who retired with fixed income investments in the early 70s saw their purchasing power cut in half by the end of the decade. $1,000 of income in 1970 could only buy about $500 worth of goods by 1980. Retirees who thought they were set for life found themselves struggling to pay for basics. Many had to go back to work. Many became dependent on family. It was a retirement catastrophe. And right now, we're seeing warning signs that we could be entering another prolonged period of higher inflation. Supply chains are fragmented. Government debt is massive. Energy costs are volatile. Labor costs are rising. Healthcare costs continue their relentless climb. If you're planning your retirement based on the assumption that inflation will stay at 2% forever, you're setting yourself up for disaster. Now let me walk you through the 5 specific inflation traps that are destroying retirement savings right now. For each trap, I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like, why it feels safe but isn't, what the hidden destruction is, and why it's particularly deadly for people over 50. The first trap, and this is the one that catches the most people, is over-reliance on fixed income products. I'm talking about bonds, certificates of deposit, fixed annuities, money market funds. These are the investments that financial advisors and banks aggressively push to people over 50. They say these are safe. They say these guarantee your principal. They say these are appropriate for conservative investors approaching retirement. And all of that sounds perfectly reasonable until you factor in inflation. Here's how they pitch it to you. Your advisor or banker says, look, you're 55 years old, you can't afford to take risks anymore, we need to protect your principal, so let's put most of your money into safe, guaranteed investments. We'll get you a CD ladder paying 4%. We'll buy some investment-grade corporate bonds yielding 5%. We'll put some money in a fixed annuity guaranteeing 4.5% for life. Sounds perfect, right? Guaranteed returns with no risk to your principal. But here's the reality. When inflation is running at 5, 6, or 7%, and you're earning 4 or 5% on your fixed income investments, you're losing purchasing power every single year. Your account balance might stay stable or even grow slightly, but the actual goods and services you can buy with that money are declining. You're getting poorer in real terms even though your statements look fine. Let me give you a concrete example. You have $500,000 and you put it all in fixed income, paying an average of 4.5% annually. After taxes, you're netting maybe 3.5%. Meanwhile, inflation is running at 6%. Every year, your purchasing power is declining by about 2.5%. Over 10 years, you've lost roughly 25% of your purchasing power. Over 20 years, you've lost nearly half. That $500,000 that felt so substantial at 60 can only buy what $250,000 could buy by the time you're 80. You've been cut in half by inflation while thinking you were being safe and conservative. And this is particularly deadly for people over 50 because this is precisely when most financial advisors tell you to shift heavily into fixed income. They say reduce your stock exposure, increase your bond allocation, protect your principal. But by doing this right when inflation risk is highest, you're locking in guaranteed purchasing power losses for the next 20 or 30 years of your life. The second trap is holding too much cash or cash equivalents. This one is incredibly common because cash feels safe. It feels prudent. Everyone tells you that as you approach retirement, you need a substantial emergency fund. You need liquidity. You need cash on hand for unexpected expenses. And all of that is true to a point. But when you hold excessive amounts of cash during periods of inflation, you're guaranteeing losses. Here's the typical advice people get. Keep 6 months of expenses in cash. Keep a year of expenses in cash. Keep 2 years of expenses in cash. And for someone over 50 approaching retirement, that advice leads them to hold $50, $75, even $100,000 or more sitting in checking accounts or savings accounts, earning almost nothing. Let's say you have $75,000 sitting in a bank account earning 1% interest. Inflation is running at 5%. Every year, that $75,000 is losing 4% of its purchasing power. After 5 years, your $75,000 can only buy what $60,000 could have bought when you started. You've lost $15,000 of purchasing power by trying to be safe and liquid. And banks absolutely love this because they're borrowing your money at 1% and lending it out at 7 or 8%. They're making a fortune while your purchasing power evaporates. But they'll never tell you this. They'll keep sending you statements showing that your balance is $75,000 and you'll feel like everything is fine, not realizing that every month you can afford a little bit less with that money. For people over 50, this trap is particularly insidious because the financial industry bombards you with messages about the importance of cash reserves as you approach retirement. And cash reserves are important, but there's a huge difference between keeping 6 months of expenses in cash versus keeping 2 or 3 years of expenses in cash. That excess cash is being destroyed by inflation while you sleep. The third trap, and this is the one that can completely devastate you, is underestimating healthcare and long-term care inflation. Most people planning for retirement do some basic math. They look at their current expenses. They figure they'll need maybe 80% of their current income in retirement. They save accordingly. But they make one catastrophic mistake. They assume their expenses will stay relatively constant. They don't account for the fact that healthcare costs inflate much faster than general inflation. Here's the reality that nobody wants to talk about. Healthcare costs have been rising at 6 to 8% annually for decades. Long-term care costs have been rising even faster. A year in a nursing home or assisted living facility can easily cost $80,000 to $120,000. and Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. Medicaid only covers it if you're essentially broke. Most people are on their own. Let me paint you a realistic scenario. You retire at 65 with $800,000 saved. You've done the math and figured you can live on $40,000 a year and your money will last 25 years. But at 75, you have a stroke. You need 6 months of rehabilitation and then ongoing care assistance. That costs you $100,000 in year 1. Then you need ongoing help at home, costing another $30,000 per year. Suddenly, your carefully planned retirement budget is completely destroyed. Your $800,000 is gone by 82 instead of 90, and if you live longer than that, you're broke. The numbers are staggering. The average person retiring today will spend over $300,000 on healthcare costs during retirement. That's not living expenses. That's just healthcare. And that number assumes relatively normal inflation. If healthcare costs continue rising at 6 to 8% annually, which they have been, those costs could easily double or triple over a 25-year retirement. For someone over 50, this trap is deadly because you don't have time to course correct. If you're 30 and you underestimate healthcare costs, you have decades to save more. But if you're 55 and you've been putting money into fixed income investments earning 4% while healthcare costs inflate at 7%, you're falling further behind every year. And by the time you actually need that healthcare at 70 or 75, you're going to discover your savings are completely inadequate. The fourth trap is choosing non-inflation adjusted annuities and insurance products. The insurance industry has done a brilliant job convincing people over 50 that annuities are the perfect retirement solution. They market annuities as providing guaranteed income for life. No matter how long you live, the checks keep coming. Sounds perfect for retirement, right? But here's what they don't emphasize. Most annuities provide fixed payments that never adjust for inflation. Here's how they sell it to you. Your insurance agent shows you beautiful projections. If you put $300,000 into this annuity at age 60, you'll receive $2,000 per month guaranteed for life starting at 65. That's $24,000 per year. Seems reasonable. You figure you can live on that plus Social Security. You sign up feeling secure. But here's the problem, that $2,000 per month is fixed. It never goes up. In year 1 of retirement, $2,000 per month feels adequate, but with 5% inflation, by year 10, that $2,000 only buys what $1,200 bought in year 1. By year 20, it only buys what $750 bought in year 1. Your guaranteed income stream has lost over 60% of its purchasing power. What felt like financial security at 65 has become poverty by 85. And here's the killer. You can't get out. You gave the insurance company $300,000. That money is gone. You don't own it anymore. You can't access it. You can't change your mind. You're locked into receiving payments that lose value every single year while inflation marches on. Now insurance companies do offer inflation-adjusted annuities where payments increase annually based on inflation. But here's what they don't tell you. Those annuities cost dramatically more. Instead of $2,000 per month, you might only get $1,300 per month to start, with future increases tied to inflation. Most people look at that and say, no way, I need the higher payment now. But those people are making a catastrophic mistake. By choosing the higher fixed payment, they're guaranteeing their own impoverishment in 20 years. For someone over 50, this trap is particularly dangerous because annuities are heavily marketed to this age group. Insurance agents target 55 to 65-year-olds aggressively, and the pitch sounds so good. Guaranteed income for life, peace of mind, financial security. But if that income doesn't adjust for inflation, you're guaranteeing that you'll be broke by 80, even though you thought you were securing your future. The fifth trap, and this might surprise you, is completely avoiding stocks and being overly conservative in your asset allocation. This one contradicts conventional wisdom, which is why it's so dangerous. Everyone tells you that as you approach 50, 60 retirement age, you need to get out of risky stocks and into safe bonds and cash. Your advisor shows you the standard allocation models. At 60, you should be 60% bonds, 40% stocks. At 70, you should be 70% bonds, 30% stocks. Sounds prudent and conservative, right? Here's the problem. Over the long term, stocks are the only asset class that consistently beats inflation. Bonds don't beat inflation. Cash doesn't beat inflation. Real estate sometimes beats inflation. But stocks, over decades, return about 10% annually on average. That's roughly 7 to 8% after inflation. If you completely avoid stocks to be safe, you're guaranteeing that inflation will erode your purchasing power. Let me show you the math. You have $600,000 at age 55. You put it all in bonds and cash averaging 4% returns. After taxes, you're netting 3%. Inflation averages 5%. Over 20 years to age 75, your real purchasing power has been cut by about 35%. Your $600,000 can only buy what $400,000 could when you started. Now let's say instead you kept 50% in low-cost stock index funds. Those stocks average 8 to 10% over the same 20 years. Even with volatility, your overall portfolio maintains or grows its purchasing power. You can still afford to live at 75 because your stocks grew faster than inflation. But here's what people over 50 hear constantly. Stocks are too risky. You can't afford losses. What if the market crashes right when you retire? And those concerns aren't completely unfounded. But the solution isn't to abandon stocks entirely. The solution is to have enough in stable investments to cover 5 to 7 years of expenses and keep the rest in stocks to grow and beat inflation over the long term. The financial industry loves pushing people over 50 into conservative portfolios because it's an easy sale. Nobody gets sued for being too conservative. But the real risk isn't market volatility. The real risk is inflation destroying your purchasing power over a 20 or 30-year retirement. And by going too conservative too early, you're accepting that inflation loss as inevitable. For people over 50, this trap is deadly because you still have 20, 30, even 40 years to live. If you shift entirely to bonds and cash at 55 and live to 85, that's 30 years for inflation to destroy you. You need growth assets. You need some exposure to stocks. Otherwise, you're choosing guaranteed impoverishment via inflation instead of accepting manageable market risk. So what should you actually do? How do you structure your finances to actually fight inflation and protect your retirement? Let me give you a practical framework that works. First, you need to maintain meaningful stock market exposure through low-cost broad index funds. If you're 55 and healthy, you should still have 50 to 60% of your long-term money in stocks. Yes, stocks are volatile. Yes, you might see losses in some years, but over 10, 15, 20 years, stocks are your best defense against inflation. Use funds like Vanguard Total Stock Market or Fidelity's S&P 500 Index Fund with expense ratios under 0.1%. Second, add Treasury inflation-protected securities, known as TIPS, or I bonds to your portfolio. These are government bonds where the principal adjusts with inflation. If inflation goes up, your investment value goes up. These aren't going to make you rich, but they preserve purchasing power, which is exactly what you need for the portion of your portfolio that must be conservative. Third, consider some exposure to real estate through real estate investment trusts, not direct property ownership. REITs tend to do well during inflationary periods because rents and property values often rise with inflation. A small allocation, maybe 5 to 10%, can provide additional inflation protection. Fourth, delay taking Social Security as long as possible, ideally until age 70. Why? Because Social Security payments adjust annually for inflation via the cost of living adjustment. By waiting until 70, you lock in a much higher base payment that then inflates with you. This is one of the best inflation protections available. Fifth, if you must use annuities, pay the extra cost for inflation-adjusted versions. Yes, your initial payment will be lower. But over a 20 or 30-year retirement, the inflation adjustments will more than make up for it. Don't let the insurance agent talk you into fixed payments just because they look better on paper today. Sixth, reassess your spending budget annually based on actual inflation, not assumptions. Most people set a retirement budget and then never adjust it. But if inflation is running hot, you need to cut discretionary spending to preserve capital. Be realistic about what things cost today, not what they cost 5 years ago. The key principles are diversification, low fees, and maintaining growth potential. You don't need to get rich in retirement. You just need to not get destroyed by inflation. That requires accepting some market volatility in exchange for long-term growth that outpaces inflation. It requires being smart about which guaranteed income sources you choose. And it requires constant vigilance about the real purchasing power of your savings, not just the nominal account balance. These 5 inflation traps are silently destroying retirement dreams for millions of people over 50 right now. Over-reliance on fixed income, holding too much cash, underestimating healthcare inflation, choosing non-adjusted annuities, avoiding stocks entirely. Each one feels safe and prudent. Each one is actually guaranteeing that inflation will erode your wealth. And the tragedy is that most people don't realize what's happening until it's too late. They see their account balances staying stable or growing slightly, and they think everything is fine. They don't understand that purchasing power is what matters, not account balance. By the time they're 75 and discovering they can't afford their medications or their heating bill, the damage is done. There's no recovery at that age. Your 70-year-old self is watching you right now. That person is hoping desperately that you understand inflation and plan accordingly. Don't let inflation steal the life you've worked so hard to build. Don't let banks and insurance companies lull you into products that feel safe but guarantee your impoverishment. If this video opened your eyes to the reality of inflation, I need you to take action immediately. Smash that like button to help more people see this truth. Share this with every friend or family member over 50. They need to understand these traps before it's too late. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell because I'm going to keep exposing the truth about retirement money that Wall Street doesn't want you to know. We're going to talk about hidden fees, misleading projections, and all the ways the financial industry profits from your ignorance. Leave a comment and tell me which aspect of inflation worries you most. Is it healthcare costs? Is it food and energy? Is it overall cost of living? Let's talk about it in the comments and help each other prepare. Inflation doesn't care about your feelings or your plans. It's mathematical. It's relentless, but you can fight back if you understand it and plan intelligently. Protect your retirement starting today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.